This podcast is made possible by Vena.
Hello, my name is Will Bondurant, Chief Financial Officer at Castlight Health, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 874.
It's my job to worry about everything. I keep looking over my shoulder of like, hey, how's the macro is going to impact us? I can't forecast what the macro is going to look like. I can't forecast if it's going to be recessions or when the recession is going to end. But what we can do is we can prepare ourselves on the different scenarios and what we're going to do about it. Our focus is going to continue to be like, hey, we want to invest for the long term, but we want to make sure it's a balancing act that we don't overextend ourselves. So that means on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis, we continue to forecast. We use data to drive a decision to see if there's any signal to tell us, and we continuously adjust our plan as we move forward.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Wailun Chan, CFO of Grafana Labs. No matter how many years Wailun Chan's finance career ultimately spans, the decade he spent at LinkedIn will always loom large. As a finance career investment, it perhaps goes without saying that a 10-year resume stint is increasingly rare today. And it's not uncommon for a decade investor to look back on his or her career and share one or two if-onlys, as in, if only I had left 3 years sooner. That's not the case for Wailun Chan, whose LinkedIn career spanned from 2010 to 2020, a period during which the social media company's workforce would grow from 400 to 16,000, and its revenue would grow from 100 million to close to 10 billion. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Managing multiple spreadsheets, disconnected data, numbers you just can't trust. Your finance team can't be the strategic partner your organization needs right now, with obstacles like that getting in your way. Vena can change that. Vena brings people, processes, and systems together in a single collaborative analytical platform so you can drive connected business planning and better decision making. And it's the only native Excel complete planning platform built for Microsoft 365 with Power BI embedded. With Vena, your financial and operational data is always connected, and your teams are always armed with insights and time to focus on what matters most. So when the stakes are high and the margin for error low, plan with agility, plan with resilience, plan with Vena so you can be prepared for whatever comes next. Visit venasolutions.com/planningaces to learn more about how Vena will help you plan for anything. Hello, we're speaking with Wailun Chan, CFO of Grafana Labs. Wailun, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Jack.
So, Wailun, as we always do, we ask our guests to look back for us, try to identify and share with us some of the experiences they feel prepared them for the finance leadership role that they have today. What comes to mind for you?
Great questions. I actually think there are three different points in my career that really shape and form who I am as a finance leader today. And the first one, I'm probably dating myself, so I'll go all the way back to my first internship at Kraft Foods when they were still part of Philip Morris. If you're in the 80s and 90s, you remember that. And the reason I raised that first one as the first point is I was a dairy commodity buyer in my first internship, which is which was a job that was super interesting in the way that, one, I was responsible for doing the future contracts that hedge the raw material cost. But then in parallel, I was responsible to actually buying the raw material. So think of that, like, for most finance people, a lot of our jobs is internal facing, and it was actually external facing role. Even before I graduated from college, so that was interesting by itself. The second part was interesting too. Is basically at the beginning of my career, I had to learn how do I build a relationship with someone who I just met, and try to create a win-win situation in any conversation and negotiations. So for someone who's an introvert like myself and my personality, it definitely took me out of my comfort zone. And I think that was actually something that, like, I would be honest that I probably hated it in my first few weeks because it was such a unnatural thing for me to do, but it actually prepared me pretty well for like different part of being a finance leader. So that was the first pivotal point to me. The second one, again, dating myself here, when I first came out of college, I joined General Electric Financial Management Program, which was, see, Jack, I'm talking about, I see you nodding your head. So you have heard of FMP at GE. So it was a rotation program that every 6 months we get a new job for 2 years. So basically in the first 2 years, we have exposure to 4 different finance departments. And the reason I bring it up is very early in my career, I actually have a good understanding of how the overall finance ecosystem and organization actually work, and like the different role, different part, how the interdependency and the potential impact that can drive the business result. So that was my second one. And then the last one, I can is no way I can skip this one, which is my 10 years at LinkedIn. And I joined LinkedIn when it was 400 people, less than $100 million revenue. And by the time when I left, I think it was about 15,000 employee, north of $10 billion revenue. And I basically went through the whole life cycle of a corporations over 10 years, from being a startup to IPO, 20-ish quarters of earnings call, ups and downs, mostly ups, and then as well as the acquisition by one of the best companies in the world, which is Microsoft. And another way that I sometimes think about it was I was a 10 years old car with 30 years mileage on it. And so there's a lot of nuggets, there's a lot of inside knowledge that I gained over the 10 years time frame.
What struck me, you were sort of on the FP&A track from your very early career then, right? Right at Kraft, it was FP&A for you. Is that right? Did you ever at some point segue out and back in, or how did it work exactly?
So it was during the GFMP program, we rotated through like controllership, accounting, FP&A. It was actually around that time that I got the feeling that like I liked sales finance or slash FP&A more than some other function. I felt like it's kind of interesting being an introvert. Working partner with go-to-market team, it actually bring the opposite of me into the job every day. But yeah, you're right, Jack. Like I would say, like 70% of my career is on the FP&A side, and then another 30% is kind of different part of the finance organization.
So, part of being an FP&A executive is getting assigned to different projects, being involved with different parts of the organization, different functional groups from time to time. And correct me, I don't know if this was your experience, but it would seem to me, again, as you clued us in, you early on, you were quite the introvert. And FP&A, there's a strong storytelling sort of component to it as you grow and build your career. You rely on your communication skills more, I would say. Is that what you experienced? And I'm curious when you might have made a leap forward there in terms of realizing, I'm great at this analysis and what have you, but now I'm going to have to really explain it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when I think about finance career, there are like 3 different stages in a way in terms of like how we perform a role. It starts with inform. We inform the business of what's going on, and then it transitioned to influence, which has become like, as you pointed out, like being in FP&A, being a business partner. It's great that we come up with all the different ideas and insights and whatnot, but how do we influence the business to actually to look at those insights to drive the decision making. And then the last stage, which is being finance executive or CFO, which is decision making. Interestingly, I think that like from inform to influence is an easier pivot because it's the balance of quantitative versus qualitative. And what I mean by qualitative is, to your point, is how do you get someone to basically see the insight that you want to bring to the table. And I think it comes down to a combinations of the communication style, and one is my own style. I'm a visual processor, so like everything I do tends to have a lot of visual aid, like either table, chart, graphic that kind of try to simplify things like at the very like from very detailed to a very high level, but also knowing the other side of the table, like what's the other person or the other group, the rest of the team, how do they process information? So to be aware of both, it's very critical. And I think I myself developed the skills through investment by the company, obviously through all the training, but also just through the experience over time and get to know people. And then along with that, we have to build the trust and the relationship with our business partner. And that's how we actually eventually get to the point that I think whenever we can basically build a trust and relationship with a business partner and hold them accountable at the same time, then we figured out how to be a finance leader.
And you talked about the growth that LinkedIn experienced when you over that 10 years. You were the head of FP&A when you do leave LinkedIn. Where were you at the start? You were somewhere in the FP&A organization. It was still in the FP&A realm when you stepped in, and you grew to the top of the ladder there as far as FP&A is concerned.
That's a super great question, because coming from like GE and Kraft Food when they had like 100,000 employees, when I went from those companies to EA Electronic Art, I thought EA was a really small company. Then I decided to go even further, and I went to LinkedIn as a startup with 400 people. I would say it's a change of mentality. Like what I mean by that is when I was at GE Capital, there probably like 2,000 people had my job before I walked into that job. So it's a lot more optimizing and fine tuning. When I joined LinkedIn, my first job was basically sales finance, as you kind of pointed out earlier. That has always been my sweet spot. So I was the first sales finance person at LinkedIn, and it was a lot building. It was actually like spending the first few months to understand what is the business model, identify what are the key KPI, what are the levers. Any data would actually give us some early indications of what's going on with the business, with the industry. Once we figured out what those are, then we have to basically like, okay, where are the source of truth in terms of data? Then we can start getting into building the operating cadence of like, how can we drive insight and provide visibility to the business.
Excellent. Just as far as becoming a leader, I'm wondering, as you went along at LinkedIn, getting more senior roles and eventually heading up FP&A, and there was an IPO during that period too. Is that right? I mean, you went through some of the historic milestones for the company.
Yep.
I'm wondering if there was a period there where you saw your leadership suddenly take a jump, or there was a particular assignment or team that you had to lead that opened the door for you to advance more quickly. I don't know, but anything as far as how your advancement went there?
I think there are many great story around like on LinkedIn on my experience. I think one of the interesting thing that I learned from it is someone can have the same job at a company like LinkedIn at the startup and hold the same job all the way to like, let's say now, and that person basically would have had 10 different jobs during the time horizon, even maybe with the same job title. And the reason is simply running a one-person finance organization when the company was less than 100 million is very different when you try to go IPO. Like you want to be like 99.1 in terms of accuracy to all the way to when you're actually running a FP&A organization that's like 150 people. So the roles and responsibility change over the course, and that's scaling. And a lot of times people talk about, hey, like like I'm a Series A early stage company, or I'm a late stage, or I'm a public company finance person. Like the fun part at LinkedIn is there were many of us that who actually could fly multiple altitude and transform along the company transformation, and that was a pretty unique experience.
Great detail there for us. Thank you. It's clear. One would imagine that you're thinking the CFO office came into focus while you're at LinkedIn, meaning that your future you thought would be down the CFO path. And you do leave. When you do leave, you step into a CFO role. Am I right about that? It seems like yes. Would like to find an opportunity where I could serve as a CFO. I mean, that was your mindset as you leave. Is that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also, that's something there's also a trend that I kept going on, which is I keep going to an early stage company. So going back to like I started with like GE, Kraft Foods, and then EA, and then LinkedIn was a kind of late stage company. Then when I joined Grafana Labs, it was a Series B company. So there's a little bit of that as well. And I think that part is more of I'm becoming more and more passionate about like how I view a world-class finance organizations should look like and would look like. And the earlier stage I join, the more I can put my basically blueprints and fingerprints around that. So it's a combination of both of like, hey, I want to be a CFO as my next challenge, as well as the different stage of company that I want to join.
Well, Wailun, you were at LinkedIn until about 2020, and you step in the door at Grafana in April of 2021 during the pandemic. Interesting time to arrive. But can you let's before we ask you a few questions about your finance function there, let's find out about Grafana Labs. Tell us about this company. What does it do? What are its offerings about?
Yeah. No. Great questions. So Grafana Labs is an infrastructure enterprise software company. We are an open source first company, which means that we have multiple projects out there that have different products that people can use as open source without paying for it. And the product and then there will be enterprise version that like our paying customer want to basically get additional features that the open source project may or may not be included. And so like there are many use cases for Grafana, and one of the and I'll share a couple of them. One of them would be like we have a pretty good representations within like the banking and financial industries. And what they use Grafana for is, for example, Wells Fargo, JPMC, and Citibank. They have the website, they have the mobile app that the consumer use, and Grafana is providing basically the monitoring, the observability capability on like the performance of the app, the website, or any products that their customers interact with them. And then if there's any, for example, if there's any hiccups or slowdown, Grafana can help them to identify where the cost might be.
Interestingly, having visited your website, I know that some of what Grafana offers are some offerings that allow organizations to display data in a really dynamic fashion, making it easier. Is that just part of your? I would imagine it's part of your offerings, but what am I looking at exactly here?
Yeah, let me double click. So great question. Sometimes I get caught up that like because I live in the infrastructure world that like I just going like really deep or go right into it. So our product is mostly for engineers, developer. When I say infrastructure, is the engine like the backend infrastructure for the technology. So like the basically think of like the all the complexity, all the engineering work that sit behind a mobile app, the website, or anything that you want to track the technology infrastructure. And what you see on a website, which is super interesting, is something I continue to learn more and more about as I'm approaching my second year here. Is if you think about many companies today, they have like most companies today use multiple vendors for basically different use cases. And a lot of times it's really hard to have a single pane of glass to see everything in one place. Because like, for example, if you use ServiceNow, you have to move everything to the ServiceNow platform. If you use Snowflake, you have to move all your data to Snowflake platform. But most companies use multiple vendors And Grafana Labs is a visualization or dashboard that you can actually plug in all your different data sources and see it in one place. So that's one of our flagship product. And that's one of our strategic advantage that most companies don't have, that you don't have to change your engineering backend, but you can see everything in one place. And that's the first layer of a product, which is what you see on our website.
Yeah, very, very, very intriguing, interesting. Um, Curious when you step into the role there. And again, I also ask this question often, and I think it would be good to get some background. Could you offer maybe an abbreviated history of the company's capital structure, where it is today? What level of funding are you at?
Yeah, absolutely. So many of these, like all of these, are public informations that if you go to PitchBook or Google, they're sure. So we currently a Series D company. In total, we have raised a total of about $550 million. Historically, we have been a really capital efficient organizations. That means that we actually barely touch our Series C capital. So we feel that we are well funded, well capitalized to basically to navigate through the current macro environment, and we are pretty excited what's ahead of us.
So, what about stepping into this organization? Did you reorganize anything? Did you make some key hires? What were your, first 100 days about or more?
Yeah, so I like to use a framework of visibility bring predictability, predictability drive insight, and insight help us to form strategy. A lot of times, like many of us, want to jump right into the strategy at the beginning. But the reality is that if we don't have any visibility, meaning like the speed closing the book and the accuracy of our information, we can't forecast what's going to happen by the FP&A team. And we can forecast what happened in the FP&A team. There's no insight we can drive out of the actuals and the forecast. So whenever I step into an organization, I kind of use a framework to say like, hey, if I have to rate ourselves right now, do we have a good foundations for visibility? Are we closing the book accurately and timely? Do we have all the information? And then the answer is like, we're good enough that like we can actually start building more accurate forecasts. Then it will be the FP&A. So it's the assessment of each of those steps and then try to move from left to right. So then go back to your question. So what does that mean for us? So the first thing we did was we basically beef up the accounting organizations naturally. We basically executed our first Big Four audit as a private company in my first year here. And so that was the first step. Then the second step was in parallel, because we were in pretty good shape already in terms of the accounting foundation, was building out the FP&A organizations so we can have business partnership that like one, to bring some predictability so we can make decision, but as well as the strategic part of like, hey, if we have $1 extra today, where we would put it and how do we make informed decisions. So we continue going through the journey right now, but that's typically the framework and the progressions I take.
We're trying to get greater clarity on how finance is intersecting with the data world, and every finance leader, sometimes the data team or the data professionals report right to finance. Sometimes it's different, set up a little differently. Can you shed any light on how your team, the FP&A experts and the data people and the people who clean up the data are all sort of collaborating?
Yeah. I think there are a few components to it, right? It's the people, process, and technology. So first of all, we have the right people to think about just beyond, hey, the process of reporting numbers, but it's actually like, how do we interpret the numbers? What does this data tell us? The fact that we are a dashboard and basically data visualization company that should be and it is our DNA. So what our FP&A team do is they have multiple responsibility. One is on a monthly basis, we have forecast cadence that's based off the actuals from the accounting team that close the book, on a monthly basis. And then on top of that, we bring business insights to the business partner. So what I mean by that is with the go-to-market team as example, we try to look at the different vertical, different industry, how's our sales organization perform, like what's the ROI, LTV, CAC, like all the different things that like to help to inform decision making. And then the third component is it's just not looking internally, but externally. if we actually look at the benchmark externally, what are the trends, what are the different things that we're seeing? And then the fourth piece is actually non-financial data. Is there any non-financial data that help us to inform more predictability and any insight about the business? So for us, because we open source project, we look at our adoptions, somewhat similar to how LinkedIn look at the members, behavior, the engagement. We look at our software adoption in the open source world to say like, is there indications for what does it mean for us in terms of like 2 years down the road? So it's a pretty long list of things, but like when it comes down to it, it's how can I leverage a lean organizations to basically to maximize the return as much as possible, where I think the most impact the business can bring.
So, and you just shared with us that adoption metric. That's something that you've become to rely on more. I'm wondering if there's another business dynamic or something within the organization that is being measured, or you look to measure it, and then maybe educate the organization about it. Is there something that during the time you've been there's a particular number that you thought needed to be better exposed to maybe just part of the organization, maybe to the greater organization? Anything come to mind?
We report something called, we have core 5 metrics. So on a monthly basis, we report the core 5 metrics to the SLT, to the Grafana executive team. On a quarterly basis, we report our core 5 metrics to the entire company as well as to the board. So what are the core 5 metrics? And each one of them has really has a intentions behind it. The first one is adoption, because that's the top of funnel for us for a business model. So how many users, how many active instances that's running, how many dashboard is being run in the world for Grafana. So that's the first adoption. The second metrics is our quarter-over-quarter ARR growth, the net new ARR, the net new annualized revenue run rate. That give us a sense of the growth acceleration and the momentum that we have. The third metrics is ARR. It's just the scale of the business. And then the fourth is net dollar retentions. How healthy is our existing customer growth? And then the fifth one, which is our last one we're using, is the rule of 40. So we want to make sure that we're taking the intelligent growth approach as we continue to invest our money into a growth engine.
So you mentioned about the board, and is it a dashboard that you set up and you share broadly? Is it as you're looking at all these metrics, does your team call up the dashboard in the morning and there it is, or no, it doesn't work like that? It works differently, maybe. I don't know.
With my director, with my team, we track it pretty religiously on a weekly, monthly basis. We actually report internally among the finance team on some of the core 5. For the company and for the board, obviously, we present it and share it at the board meeting as part of the pre-read, as well as part of the board meeting discussions. For the entire company is during the company all hands that we share.
I want to touch on talent with you quickly, just as during COVID, and of course, and you arrived during that period. Some of our finance discussions have revealed that the leadership, CFOs, were paying closer attention to the talent situation. Tech's always had a hiring challenge, or it's been a hiring environment that was challenging for a number of years. Recently, it seems to have been tempered. But can you share with us your talent mindset and what you're, as you look to bring more top talent in house, the challenges you might face?
I think regardless where the economy is, there's always challenge to find the top 10 percentile of talents, no matter what the time is. I changed jobs during each of the recessions, ironically. And so I think if we want to really like locate, recruit, and find the top talents, like one can argue maybe a little bit easier now, less competitions, but the reality is it's always going to be hard. And so the way I always think about talent is there are characteristics that we look for. We look for someone who's intellectually curious. We want to look for someone who's a culture fit. We look for someone that brings the energy to the company. And the reason that like intellectual curiosity for me is the most important part is like if someone who has intellectual curiosity, when something comes up, regardless if that's her job or not, that person cannot help herself and just dive into it and problem solve. And so that's something that I always look for But in terms of the talent market, I think one benefit, not benefits, but like one trend I've seen a change is maybe a little bit less competitions than it was 6 or 12 months ago. Maybe our employee base is not getting as many calls as they were 12 or 18 months ago. But to find the top talents is still going. It will continue to be a challenge.
I came upon this on your blog. I don't know if it's something I'm sure you're aware of. I don't know how familiar you are, but it says that you folks recently built a recruitment data dashboard here at Grafana Labs. And what better way? They used Grafana itself to build it. I mean, is this, um, can you tell us something about that? Is that just looking at real-time hires, net new hires, or what is it really allow, what's the capability there? To put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. This is great. I mean, we love to use our own product, obviously. And so what it does is it track not just necessarily like a moment of time. We track the entire journey of the recruiting process. So as well as actually once employee comes on board. So we don't just look at one moment in time and say like what happened. So we track like, for example, like interestingly, because Grafana Labs is a really popular project and software among engineers, it actually took us less time to recruit R&D talent than go to market or G&A. So it's the flip of most tech company, which is a strategic advantage that we have. But what the dashboard track is actually we track the top of the funnel, and our candidate sources have that change over time. And if change, how would that change? And then we look at basically both the feedback that they provide us during the interview and recruiting process, as well as what the conversion rates are like during the course, and how that have changed over time. And then once employee comes on board, we also track like, hey, because on a semi-annual basis or quarterly basis, we do EVS employee surveys, and to track how things are going once folks join Grafana Labs.
Trying to shed some light on how AI is being incorporated into talent management. I'm wondering, when it comes to hiring and the talent funnel, is AI already playing a role there for you?
Yeah, AI, ML, like, AI and machine learning, it's obviously in most technology, it's part of the product roadmap as well as feature that they want to continue to enhance. So that's no question about it. This is something that like we think about, we invest. But to your point on the talent side, if there was on the first part of the questions, I think our product would give us visibility of what has happened. But when it comes on to like identify true talent, I think there's still like a big part of the human factor, like meaning like I still want to spend some time, talk to the individual, like kind of understand what's important to her, what keeps her going, what motivates her. And I think maybe one day, and maybe there's an AI that's doing that right now, but I'm a little old school that like, hey, the dashboard will give us some insight on like, hey, do we slip here? Do we slip there? Are we looking at the right places? Are we identify like good pipeline and candidates and whatnot? But when it comes to like making the decisions, to me, like human is still playing a big part of that.
Interesting. Well, thank you for exploring that with us. We are up to what we refer to as our signature question, which is where we ask you for a finance strategic moment. Might have happened anytime during the course of your career. We're just looking for one. Might have happened here at Grafana. It might have been earlier. But what comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I'll refer back to, and I'll share the story in a second, but I'll refer back to the framework that we talked about earlier, which is visibility lead to predictability that drive insight and that form the strategy. So if anything that actually happened through the full spectrum, I get really excited and I get really happy. So the story I'll share with you is back in 2010 to 2013-ish timeframe at LinkedIn. The member base was about 40% US and 60% international. But the revenue was except flip. It was about 70% US and 30% international. So the key takeaway, like the headline on that's always been like, there's a lot of white space, there's a lot of commercial opportunities for LinkedIn outside the US. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? And what was really fun was like across the finance team between FP&A, BizOps, and other organizations, we actually like look at data. And then eventually we came up with a playbook that like, hey, if the members hit certain threshold, like number of members hit certain thresholds in the market, if the engagement hits certain threshold, if there's a company, like meaning non-paying companies on our website on certain market hit certain threshold, once you hit like those three threshold, create intersection, then you can go in with the inside sales team, and then eventually you can go to enterprise sales, and pretty quickly you can create a scale go-to-market organizations. And so using the playbook, we opened 20 plus local offices over 2 years. And the speed of us to able to do that, to scale that, I think is a big driver of the hyper growth that LinkedIn experienced during the 2010 to the 2012 timeframe. And that was one that I felt that we brought visibility on like what's going on in the market. Can we drive some insight and then combine with some external data, and then to basically create a strategy on the go-to-market, and it plays out.
Hello and welcome to 60-second stories from CFO Thought Leader. Looking back, CFO Ravi Narula tells us that he wishes he had become a servant leader sooner in his career. Servant leadership. That style of leadership that deems the number one goal of leaders is to serve others. Narula tells us, if we had asked him 15 years ago whether he was a servant leader, his answer would have to have been no. In fact, it was only after attending a graduate executive program that explored leadership styles that Narula says he fully realized the impact servant leaders can make on company culture. Today, Narula credits the leadership approach with helping him advance down the CFO path. That story and much more on episode number 867 featuring Ravi Narula, CFO of Financial Force. Remember, the future of finance is listening.
I jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we're going to ask you to look back again. And we want to know about the your first 60 days as a CFO, first 30 to 60 days as a CFO. And of course, this is for new CFOs and CFOs who are just stepping in. It wasn't too long ago for you. At the same time, we have little doubt if you could go back in time and just tell yourself something that first 30 days, you'd probably like the opportunity to do so. Maybe, don't know, but what would you tell yourself?
First 60 days at Grafana Labs, what were I to my, so this is maybe the reason I have a smile on my face is we actually did the Series C in my first 60 days at Grafana Labs. So it was a pretty busy time period for us. But I'll share the story and experience with you here, which was most of the time, most CFO would not join a company and do a fundraise right away because you want to get settled in and actually like get to know the business, learn more about the product, the business model, and then you go into basically the fundraise project. For us, it actually happened in my second month. So I joined around March, April, and then we did the Series C in May. And that turns out to be like the best learning experience because I was being like basically, if you're involved and do that, you're being forced to learn everything as quickly as possible, both from like the business model standpoint, what are the key levers, as well as like make sure our financials is in a good place that we can actually support that project. And it was pretty stressful, but it was definitely like a great first 60, one of the best 60 days I have in my career.
Well, we always ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. And we're wondering if you have a habit or a part of a daily routine that you're known for, something, you've done for years, something people point out. That's just Wailun. That's how he does it. That's what he does. It might be something a family member would point out to us rather than a colleague. It's something you're known for. Anything come to mind? Personal habit, routine, something you do sets you apart.
I keep less than 10 emails in my inbox. I read every single email within 2 hours. And someone would say I may have OCD. I look at my inbox as my to-do list, and I should like to think about, hey, if I reach out to someone, I want to know what happened. I want to get a response. So when I actually look at my inbox, my reaction is 3Ds, right? Either I decide, or I delegate, or I delete. So anytime when I pull out my inbox, even during vacations, I only have 10 emails. And to me, like those 10 emails typically are the top 10, like top of mind for me at that moment.
Wow. That's interesting. Okay. Well, we also like to ask if you have a book selection for us. Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something you escape with. Anything for us?
It's an old book, The Lean Startup. Like that's one that I still go back to. I mean, it's over a decade now. Like it sounds like a lot of things that point out sounds so obvious and things that we should do, but it's surprising how many times like we lose the discipline of not doing things that we should and kind of just focusing on. We don't have to be like 99-1 all the time, like 20-80 or 80-20, wherever it depends on the situations, it's okay. And so that's a book that like I probably read it like four or five times at this point.
Wow. Nice choice for us. Thank you. We want you now, finally, our last question. We're going to ask you to look forward, and we'd like to know what your priorities are as CFO of Grafana Labs.
Yeah, so Grafana Labs continues to do really well despite the macro. That being said, it's my job to worry about everything. I keep looking over my shoulder of like, hey, how's the macro is going to impact us? I can't forecast what the macro is going to look like. I can't forecast if it's going to be recessions or when the recession is going to end. But what we can do is we can prepare ourselves on the different scenarios and what we're going to do about it. So like our focus is going to continue to be like, hey, we want to invest for the long term, but we want to make sure it's a balancing act that we don't overextend ourselves. So that means on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis, we continue to forecast. We use data to drive a decision to see if there's any signal to tell us, and we continuously adjust our plan as we move forward. So the balancing act of like continue to invest for the long term, but like not to overextend, it's something that is top of mind for us for this year.
Wailun Chen, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.